I'm a conservatory graduate with enough skill to seriously pursue a career as a pianist. Don't compare me with you unskillful amateurs who play just for fun. My eldest son's wife looks down on him, considering herself superior because of her background in music education. Even when his own playing is being mocked, my son chooses not to respond at all. You should feel grateful to have a woman like me to marry, don't you think? She belittles and dominates him mentally. Due to a lack of self-confidence, he ends up being submissive to her demands. My son is a kind and attractive man, so why doesn't he divorce such an awful woman? He should have more confidence in himself. I couldn't stand seeing my son treated this way by his wife. When I was contemplating these thoughts, my husband and I coincidentally encountered my son and his wife at a jazz bar. The scheduled pianist didn't show up on time, so my husband and I decided to help out by stepping in to perform. Things took an unexpected turn. I'm Melissa, 72 years old. I live with my husband, James. After the birth of our eldest son, Thomas, the busy and lively days seemed to pass in the blink of an eye. Before we knew it, Thomas was married and my husband had retired. Being just the two of us now, I savor the luxury of sleeping in, going to cafes for brunch, and indulging in my hobby of playing the piano. My husband and I sometimes have impromptu jazz sessions with my husband on the drums and me on the piano. Since we both share a love for music, we never get bored of spending time together. Life seems fulfilling, but we did have one concern. That would be my eldest son's wife, Amanda. Our relationship with her was awful from the first time we met her, when they came to us to announce their engagement. Nice to meet you. My name is Amanda. My first impression of her was that she seemed a bit cool but polite woman. It wasn't a particularly negative impression. Hey, Thomas, hurry up and give them the gift. Stop dawdling around. I'm sorry. While her words felt a bit harsh, I thought that since my son has a laid-back personality, it might be better for him to have someone who can take charge and guide him. I simply thought she was someone who was reliable. You also play the piano? Amanda asked me after seeing the piano in our house. With not too many rooms in our house, we have an upright piano and an electric drum set sitting in the living room. I used to teach my son to play the piano and we used to play together. Yes, it's just a hobby. My son used to play too. Good old times. Oh, I've heard Thomas play the piano. He's awful, isn't he? What? I couldn't believe my ears. I thought it was a joke or teasing when she started speaking ill of her own fiancé, but she continued with a smirk on her face. He makes so many mistakes. I couldn't bear listening to it. You wouldn't think he's been playing for over 10 years. How dare you say such a thing? I'm not kidding. I was a piano major at a conservatory. I'm currently working as a music teacher, but there was a time when I contemplated whether to become a pianist. My ears are quite discerning, you know. Thomas's piano playing is rather unpleasant. My son blushes and looks down as his face turns bright red. I couldn't bear it. My son is by no means untalented. There was a time when he used to say that he wanted to become a pianist. He practiced hard, but unfortunately failed the entrance exam for the National Conservatory he applied to. Failing an exam for a national conservatory is not uncommon. The tuition is low, making it highly competitive. Why don't you try for a private conservatory? I suggested. It's okay, Mom. Tuition's too expensive. It's not for me. My son's heart had been shattered, and after that, he hardly ever played the piano. More than 10 years have passed since then, and seemed like he'd finally come to terms with it. When he came home to visit, he'd sometimes play. Sure, his technical skills weren't perfect, but he was clearly enjoying playing again. I looked forward to seeing him play, And yet his wife insulted him, calling him untalented.
It's okay, Mom. She's just telling the truth.
But
Amanda graduated from the very conservatory I wanted to go to. Isn't that amazing? Plus, she's very good looking too, unlike me.
well, you've got that right. You have no talent for music. You just need to keep quiet and bring me home the paycheck.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Hey, I've kept quiet this whole time, but
Dad, please stop.
my husband couldn't contain his anger. His face was crimson and his voice was rising. But my daughter-in-law didn't seem bothered at all. She just sat there looking smug. My son desperately tried to diffuse the situation, causing my husband to fall silent. But his face told me he wasn't happy about it. I was dumbfounded. Is it normal for someone to be this rude when meeting their future in-laws for the first time? I felt no sense of love toward my son. Thomas, are you sure you want to marry her?
Yeah. The only woman who'd want to marry a guy like me is Amanda.
That's not true.
But it is true. She's the only one for me.
My son's cry was full of pain. He's always been humble, but did he always lack this much confidence in himself? In response to my son's words, his wife grinned smugly. Despite my continued opposition, my son remained firm in his decision and went ahead with the marriage. Ever since, he's been under the control of his wife. She avoids doing any household chores, claiming that it would damage her hands, and instead she unloads all of the responsibilities onto my son, who would take care of the chores after work. Every now and then he'd call, sounding miserable, but he would flat out refuse whenever I suggested splitting up. I couldn't understand what my son was thinking. However, a shocking event happened one day. My son and I were out shopping for my husband's birthday gift. I'd been having knee troubles ever since turning 70, and walking was a struggle, so my son was helping me out by driving me around. While strolling through the mall thinking we'd pick something out together, we spotted a familiar figure.
Is that Amanda?
My son muttered. There she was, his wife, walking arm in arm with another man. You're right. Who's that guy she's with?
I don't know him.
Does she have any brothers?
No, she's an only child.
My son's face turned pale. As soon as I grasped the situation, I found myself stepping out in front of her. Amanda, who's this man with you? Huh? What are you doing here? Don't worry about us. I'm asking who this man is. I'm going home. Okay, see you later. The man she'd been arm in arm with hurried away, and Amanda waved at him with a disappointed look on her face. Then she crossed her arms and sighed. Can you not get in my way? In your way? Are you having an affair? If I am, so what? What do you mean, so what? Should we get divorced? I don't mind. She showed no remorse whatsoever and remained brazenly unapologetic. I was taken aback by her unexpected reaction. When I looked at my son, he was casting his gaze down, his eyes wandering aimlessly. Amanda moved closer to him and slipped her arm around his shoulder. Are you okay with a divorce? You really think there's someone else who would marry a boring pushover like you? How dare you say that to my son? But it's the truth. You should be thankful that I, who had to deal with your complete lack of experience with women, married you. Are you sure about a divorce? It's going to be pretty lonely being all by yourself when you're old, don't you think? She placed her hand on my son's slumped shoulder, speaking to him in a voice. It almost sounded like she was trying to brainwash him. Didn't you always want to marry someone who could play the piano? Because you come from a family that loves music. You know you'll never find anyone else as skilled in piano and as beautiful as me, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Thomas, Don't listen to her. You're a wonderful man. You need to have more confidence in yourself. Whose words do you believe? Mine or your mother's? If we get divorced and you end up alone, your future will be bleak. Your mother is going to pass away sooner or later. Has she thought about what would happen to you when she's gone? That's not true. You may not have siblings, but you have friends, and you might even find a great partner, too. Mother-in-law, it's your fault if he ends up single. How lonely would it be if he had to spend his old age all alone? What Amanda was saying was absolute nonsense, making my son believe that he couldn't survive without her. I raised my voice with the intention of breaking them up. Thomas, you should break up with her.
Sorry, Mom, I won't break up.
Why?
You wouldn't understand. You're good at everything. You're a great cook, and even on the piano, no matter how much I practiced, I could never surpass you.
Thomas hunched his back and looked down. I never imagined that I was the one who was pushing him into a corner. I'm not particularly good at cooking, although it is true that I've been hiding the fact that I was once a professional pianist. I'm not such a great person. And yet, my son was comparing himself to me and losing his confidence. Your mother didn't even care that you were hurting. I'm the only one on your side. Shall we go home? Wait, Thomas, let's talk this out. My son turned away from me as his wife led him by the hand and started walking. I could do nothing but stand there, shocked. When I told the story to my husband, his face turned bright red. What are you talking about? It isn't your fault. It's all because of that wife. But I didn't know our son was hurting. If I had cared more about him sooner, he wouldn't have lost his confidence. That's on me, too. Tears fell from my eyes. Thomas has always been shy and has a hard time expressing his feelings. I thought it would be best to wait until he was ready to talk, but maybe I was wrong. I couldn't forgive myself for hurting him without realizing it. Melissa, we have to talk to Thomas about this. It's not about who's at fault. My husband desperately tried to comfort me, but my mood didn't lift. I was still worried about my son after a few days had passed. That was when my husband, who was supposed to be out shopping, came home holding a flyer. Hey, guess what? The pianist, Mr. Johnson, is coming to a local jazz bar. What? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson is a professional pianist, known not only for his piano skills, but also for his engaging stage presence, appearing on many TV shows. My husband and I love Mr. Johnson's piano and have even bought his CDs. He plays a wide range of music, from classical to jazz, but he often performs classical and pop songs on TV. If he's coming to a jazz bar, he'll definitely perform some jazz. This was a very rare opportunity. Why don't we go together? It might be a nice change of pace. That sounds nice. Let's do it. And so we immediately made our reservation. Unfortunately, on the day of the event, we were hit by a typhoon. Heavy rain and strong winds started in the morning, and transportation was at a standstill. Despite this, we made it to the venue on foot, where we were greeted by a vibrant audience. Despite everyone's damp shoes and wet clothing, it was evident that they were still eager to hear Mr. Johnson's performance. I was looking around the bar when I saw my eldest son and his wife.
Dad, hey Mom, you're here too.
Thomas. My son turned his eyes away as I stood surprised by this unexpected encounter. Oh, you guys are here. We like Mr. Johnson's music. I wonder if those who just play as a hobby can truly understand the charm of Mr. Johnson. I had the privilege of being taught by him as a guest instructor during my conservatory days. Impressive, huh?
Excuse me?
My daughter-in-law laughed proudly. Despite my annoyance, I didn't want to start a fight when I finally had the chance to listen to the performance. I squeezed my husband's hand as he was about to retort. Then the bar began to stir. The staff seemed to be in a hurry. When the owner stood on the stage, he bowed his head in apology.
I'm terribly sorry, but due to the typhoon, Mr. Johnson's arrival has been delayed. It will take at least an hour and a half until he arrives. I must ask you to wait.
No way! We came all the way here in this terrible weather. And what are we supposed to do in the meantime?
The audience booed.
It's such a disappointment. Even if we ate, we'd be done by the time he arrived.
My daughter-in-law also made rude remarks. Some people were getting ready to leave despite the rare opportunity to hear a live performance. I couldn't sit still and decided to make a proposal to my husband. Why don't we perform?
What? Us?
Yes, we could be a placeholder until Mr. Johnson arrives. What do you think?
What are you saying? People came here to listen to a professional performance. They're going to heckle your amateur piano playing.
My daughter-in-law laughed at me in mockery, but I ignored her and looked at my husband. My husband, understanding how I felt, nodded in agreement. Sounds like a plan. Let me talk to the owner. He spoke with the owner and we climbed onto the stage. Luckily, being a jazz bar, there was also a drum set. After calming our nerves, we looked at each other and began to perform. When we started to play, the noisy audience became quiet. Who's that? They're really good. Before we knew it, even the ones who were about to leave had taken their seats and were captivated by our performance. Both my husband and I felt uplifted by the atmosphere, and we started improvising, engaging with the audience and eliciting laughter. That was when I locked eyes with Thomas. He looked at us in surprise. Enjoying the situation, I went over to Thomas and pulled his hand. Mom, what are you doing? Let's play together. What? But music is about having fun. The song we decided to play was When You Wish Upon a Star, which we played together when he was in elementary school. My husband waited for us to start playing while he kept the rhythm on the drums. It's okay. Leave it to me. Hesitant, Thomas looked around and nervously placed his hands on the keyboard as instructed. Then he started to play. He must have remembered it from all the practice he put in back in the day. His smooth finger movements brought a smile to my face. Cheers and applause could be heard from the audience. Encouraged by the audience response, Thomas's face lit up and he joyfully continued to play. It was as if he had returned to his childhood days. Before we knew it, an hour and a half had passed. As we finished playing, we were greeted with a loud round of applause, and standing there was Mr. Johnson, the pianist. Bravo! That was fantastic. Thank you. We were about to bow and leave the stage, assuming we were done now that Mr. Johnson had arrived, but he had been stopped. Are you guys a family? Yes, this is my husband and son. No wonder it was such a harmonious performance. Don't you all agree? When he addressed the audience, applause roared. Not finding the situation amusing, my daughter-in-law stomped her way onto the stage and approached Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, do you remember me? I was once your piano student. I apologize, but I can't recall. Is that so? Well, if you'd like, please listen to my performance as well. These people here only play the piano for fun, but I aspire to be a professional, so I can deliver an even more splendid performance. Mr. Johnson looked baffled as my daughter-in-law suddenly interjected and started talking. Well, if you're that eager to play, go ahead.
With that, my daughter-in-law grinned at me maliciously. You'll feel embarrassed after hearing my performance. My mood dropped instantly as she whispered these words in a low voice. She started playing the piano and the audience listened quietly. After playing a piece while wearing a self-satisfied expression, Mr. Johnson retorted,
Pretty ordinary.
Ordinary?
Yeah. It's not bad, but it's not enjoyable to listen to. Your piano doesn't have the charm the previous performance had.
What? What? There's no way I would lose to these amateurs. Mr. Johnson shook his head at my hysterical daughter-in-law.
If you truly believe that, you lack taste. You said you aimed to be a professional, but it seems unlikely. Robots are enough to play technically well.
With these words, my daughter-in-law's face turned beet red as she glared at me. As I silently reveled in a sense of satisfaction, Mr. Johnson made his way to our table.
How long have you been playing the piano?
Well, I used to be a professional. My husband used to be in a band as a percussionist.
Really? May I ask your name?
My maiden name is Melissa Hall.
Melissa Hall?
Those who had been listening to our conversation began murmuring. It seemed that people of our generation recognized my name. Mr. Johnson grabbed my hand, his eyes shining.
I'm a fan of yours, Melissa.
Me? Really?
Yes. I started learning the piano after listening to your performances. I've always wanted to perform together someday, but you retired. I never imagined we would meet like this.
He joyfully shared, surprising my daughter-in-law, who hurriedly approached. Wait, what's this about being a former pianist?
Didn't you know? Melissa is a famous pianist who has won prizes at international competitions. She has performed extensively abroad, and her concerts in the U.S. were always sold out.
I didn't know that.
Mom, why didn't you tell me?
My dejected son asked, causing my husband and I to lower our heads apologetically. We're sorry for keeping it a secret. The truth is, I stopped being a pianist when I became pregnant with you. I decided that I couldn't continue my career. We didn't tell you because we were afraid you would blame yourself.
So, I'm the reason you gave up your career as a pianist?
That's not true. Yes, I wanted to continue as a pianist, but my greatest desire was to have you and I never regret this decision. The days I've spent with you are my most precious treasures. Thomas began to sob. I've always loved listening to you play the piano because you play with so much joy. I'm glad we could play the piano together today.
Your son's performance was excellent. His joy was truly infectious. Really?
Thomas blushed at Mr. Johnson's praise. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law glared at us, her face twisted in anger. How dare you embarrass me like this, keeping your career as a pianist a secret? I didn't mean to. I started to explain, but Mr. Johnson stepped in between us.
If anyone is causing embarrassment, it's you.
What? No, I didn't.
You've been bragging about being the better pianist since the beginning. This isn't a competition. If you want to show off your skills, why don't you join a contest? Don't ruin the atmosphere of this enjoyable jazz bar.
Upon hearing Mr. Johnson's words, the other customers also started to voice their agreement. My daughter-in-law's face turned red as she trembled with anger. I won't forgive this. With these parting words, she stormed out of the bar. After that, Mr. Johnson's performance began, and we enjoyed the delicious food and music. As we headed home that day, I walked with my husband and son. Thomas, I love the way you play the piano. You don't have to be the best in a competition. I love the joy you express when you play. Not just that, There are so many other things about you that I love.
That's right. Like your ability to work hard and persevere. You should be more proud of that. Dad? Mom?
Although we didn't talk much after that, my son called a few days later to tell us that he was getting a divorce. This news was music to our ears.
I'm done wasting my life on that woman.
My son seemed to have regained his spirit, which relieved us. We later heard that his ex-wife was sued for large alimony and was struggling to repay it. She was known for her extravagant spending, and it seemed it had been depleting our son's earnings. After the divorce, she tried to rely on her affair partner, but it seems that he, who was also married, didn't reciprocate. That wasn't the end of her troubles with him. She had been spotted several times waiting for him near his workplace and had caused scenes in public. Eventually, her affair was exposed at work and he was fired. In an attempt to make a living, she decided to open a piano school and rented a nice room with soundproofing. But due to her lack of experience and reputation, she struggled to attract students, and her debts kept increasing. All of this was her own doing. After the divorce, my son gained confidence and even had plans to go to a concert with a woman who also loves music. I was so happy to see my son's transformation. And the best part was that we started performing together occasionally. I'm sure there are women who will appreciate my son for who he is. I truly wish for my son's happiness.